The United States and Canada, two great countries, great friends, but more importantly, combined, we are the largest democratic landmass in the entire world. So it is interesting to note that the government of the United States can cease to function at the drop of a hat. And here in Canada, we are once again prorogued. Now, of course, things aren't as bad up here as they are down there. When our parliament is prorogued, the mechanics of government still work. Taxes are collected, the mail is delivered, veterans are abused on a daily basis. But MPs do not sit in the House of Commons, so nobody can ask the government a question. I mean, nobody. Even reporters can't ask questions anymore. I looked into it. Compared to other world leaders, Hugo Chavez has answered more questions from the press than Stephen Harper in the last 6 months. And Chavez died 7 months ago. When MPs go back to work next week, if he lets them go back, they will have gone 117 days without sitting in the House of Commons. There's a word for people on that schedule. Unemployed. The difference being, of course, MPs are still paid, which is why you don't hear any bleating from the backbench. They love the notion of representing their constituents from the privacy of their basement or their bass boat. This is our fault. We have all become comfortable with a system where the Prime Minister can simply close Parliament on a whim. Well, there's a term for that. It's called taxation without representation. In the United States, it led to the American Revolution. In Canada, it's becoming business as usual. Democracy takes practice. We either use it or lose it.
And that's the way we start things off right here. I'm Darren Howard.
And I'm Robert Nisbet.
You're tuned into Video Radio, back after a brief hiatus.
A few technical difficulties.
And, of course, we had documentaries to cut, but we've got to get back on the train because it looks like our MPs might actually go back to work.
Yeah, and our spy agency's been up to nefarious things.
So while we question our spy agency and we get ready to throw Stephen Harper on the hot coals, we enjoy this video clip.
It sounds like the plot of a spy thriller, but it may in fact be the work of the Canadian government, all connected to those allegations Canada spied on Brazil. The CBC's Tom Perry has the latest on this story tonight.
It's his job to keep secrets, and the chief of the communication security establishment did just that today. At a security conference, John Forster would say only this about allegations his agents spied on the Brazilian government.
Given the recent reports, everything CSE does in terms of its foreign intelligence mandate follows Canadian law.
Hardly a thorough explanation, and so the question remains, why would Canada spy on Brazil? One theory that's getting some attention is that Canada may have been looking for information on Brazil's burgeoning offshore oil market. Newly obtained documents show the close relationship between Canada's security agencies and this country's resource sector. Since 2005, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service has hosted secret twice-yearly meetings with energy companies to discuss national security and criminal intelligence, threat risk assessment, and to share energy-related classified information. They've examined threats to Canada's energy infrastructure, everything from the vulnerability of pipelines to explosive attack to Aboriginal protests and occupations. A former public safety minister says there's nothing sinister going on here, just good planning. But if private companies and spy agencies are sharing security information, some wonder what else they're sharing.
The evidence is quite clear that CSEC has been complicit in industrial espionage, and it's totally unacceptable. We're talking about the type of behavior that we reproach other countries.
The opposition may have more questions next week when Parliament starts a new session. As for those secret meetings, the Federal Public Safety Department issued a statement today calling them standard practice. Tom Perry, CBC News, Ottawa.
So what they're saying is that it was all legal?
Apparently. Isn't that what James Clapper said? About the NSA?
Yes. Make sure you check our facts out. But the real fact of the matter is we really cheesed off Brazil. I mean, they've got something to say about it, but we're saying it all the time. Check our facts. We are not the end-all and be-all, and the CBC certainly isn't either.
Absolutely not.
Sal, what do you got for me, brother?
Well, apparently there's some diplomatic furor over this issue.
I love diplomatic furor. Kind of makes me feel all corporately Canadian on the inside. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you start your own radio station, but until then, check out this.
It's headline news in Brazil, revelations that Canada's electronic spy agency has been conducting industrial espionage aimed at Brazil's Ministry of Mines and Energy. Halfway around the world in Indonesia, these reports are also being taken very seriously by Prime Minister Stephen Harper.
So I'm obviously very concerned about this story and about some of the reports around it. Very, very concerned.
At Brazil's embassy in Ottawa, the ambassador refused to comment today. But Brazil's president, Dilma Rousseff, has made it clear she's very angry about being a target of this Canadian spy operation.
This suggests that our government has lost its moral compass. We have no business spying on other countries to try to gain commercial advantage over them.
Canada has a lot to lose if this turns into a major diplomatic war. 500 Canadian companies are active in Brazil, which is now the largest economy in Latin America, 7th largest around the world. The controversy has thrust Communications Security Establishment Canada, known as CSEC, into the spotlight, a space it likes to avoid. This super-secret agency based in Ottawa can monitor emails, text messages, phone calls. It's not allowed to spy on communications within Canada, but everything outside our borders is fair game. There is a watchdog that monitors CSEC, but most of the agency's work is done in secret, and critics say more safeguards are needed. But given the secrecy surrounding CSEC, Canadians will likely never hear much about that follow-up. Jennifer Madigan, Global News, Ottawa.
As Jennifer mentioned, upsetting our trade relationship with Brazil would be a huge economic hit. Brazil's our 11th largest trading partner. We sent $2.6 billion in exports there last year, including fertilizers, oil, and machinery. $4 billion worth of Brazilian goods came the other way. And Canadians invested nearly $10 billion in Brazilian companies last year, while Brazil invested nearly $16 billion in Canadian stocks.
So I had no idea that we had a trade, that they're doing more with us.
It's a huge trade partnership with Brazil.
Of course, they outpopulate us. Okay, there's way more Brazilians than there are Canadians.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can see them, but they're investing billions in us, and then CSEC gets caught with its hand in the cookie jar.
I think they're getting a little tired of the gringos messing in South American affairs.
Yeah, we've got a picture of Harper sitting beside the Brazilian president, and she does not like him.
And he's very concerned.
He's very concerned.
Sure you are, Steve.
Yeah, I know. How's that $3.1 billion going, Mr. Harper? The one thing that I really noticed in there, they said, well, you're not allowed to spy on Canadians.
Well, it's not legal.
All right. So, I wish we had like a news clip about that.
Well,
It's Canada's most secretive intelligence agency, and for decades it has lived in the darkest shadows of spy world. Until now. John Adams recently retired as its spy master, and he has a warning for all Canadians.
If you think anything you read, write, or send via the internet is private, think again. Even passwords are no guarantee of security.
If you use a word that's in the dictionary, they'll crack it in less than a minute.
John Adams headed the Communications Security Establishment Canada for 7 years. Part of its mandate is to intercept foreign communications, including those coming into Canada. It has the capability to spy on Canadians, but Adams is firm the agency isn't.
That's against the law. Absolutely not.
Adams says there are checks and balances.
People will say, well, law isn't enough. Well, okay, maybe it isn't. I don't necessarily subscribe to that theory. But there is a review agency that does spend its full time reviewing everything that CSE does.
That small review agency is headed by a retired judge reporting to the defense minister. Critics say that's not enough to monitor the massive amounts of information gathered by CSEC. Others say the problem is secrecy.
We don't know enough about what CSEC does.
Jennifer Stoddard's job is to protect Canadians' privacy. But even for her, CSEC's wall of secrecy is impossible to penetrate.
I think they could be a bit more forthcoming about what they're doing, particularly what they're doing with Canadians' data.
Adams admits the agency has deliberately kept Canadians in the dark. That's all changing.
And because they use the same networks we do.
Despite earlier denials, we now know the U.S. National Security Agency has been gathering masses of information on its own citizens. And that has raised questions about what CSEC is doing.
CSEC's participation in spying at the London summit is now bound to raise questions about whether Canada also spied on its own guests when it hosted the G20 the next year in Toronto.
A couple of things here. I'm kind of surprised that the CBC and CTV, that the mainstream is covering this.
Yeah, but they can't really come out and say that they think they're spying on us. They just have to allude to it.
But the guy says if your password is a word, they can get it in like 30 seconds. Is that what it was?
Of course.
I mean, like, oh my gosh, like this guy is just blatantly saying it.
And, you know, it just seems, I don't believe a single thing that government or ex-government officials have to say. I think they're lying all the time because they do it all the time.
If you take a look at the way the economy works and the way that things work, they are protecting interests. Now, they're saying straight out that it's oil indigenous. You know, if Brazil gets its own oil,
it's industrial espionage is what they're committing.
Okay.
It's the same as the NSA was doing with Brazil, too.
Yeah, good point, man.
You know?
I mean, that's, yeah. Take a look at our previous shows. We did talk about the fact that NSA got its fingers slapped for hitting on Brazil like that because Brazil is a true democracy, and they are protecting their indigenous people. But we've got this.
Of course.
Now, so go ahead. What's this?
Well, of course, there may be a bit of corruption in Canadian corporations.
Say it's not so.
According to the World Bank, it is.
The World Bank has been stepping up its fraud investigations in recent years with 4 times more debarments than in 2012. As it stands, the World Bank debarment list includes a high number of Canadian companies, the majority of which are affiliates of SNC Lavalin Incorporated, said the bank's manager of investigations, James David Fielder. As a result of the misconduct found during the probe, the Montreal-based engineering and construction firm and its affiliates were debarred in April 2013 for 10 years as part of a settlement with SNC Lavalin. The long list of debarments mainly stems from just one large Canadian firm. Overall, Canada had 119 total companies on the list, including 2 permanently debarred since 1999. Canadian firms may be at higher risk of being sanctioned by the World Bank. This is as a result of Canadian authorities not being as aggressively enforcing its anti-corruption laws as its U.S. counterparts. The result of that is that the Canadian companies may have been lulled into a false sense of security because their own national authorities were not closely scrutinizing their global operations that nobody else would either. These revelations came almost simultaneously as new Canadian High Commissioner to Guyana, Nicole Giles, was quoted in sections of the media as saying that the Canadian government wants a reduction in the level of corruption in Guyana and called for more public debate on the matter. Presidential Advisor on Governance, Guerrilla described the comments reportedly made by newly appointed Canadian High Commissioner with regards to corruption in Guyana as unfortunate. Teixeira said that while the High Commissioner is free to express her opinion and that of her government, the way in which it was presented was unfortunate in terms of Guyana and Canada relations.
Man, oh man, talking about get your hand caught in a cookie jar.
Oh, the timing was extremely unfortunate.
Unfortunate timing. But you know what? It's Brazil. They've got their head on. We're talking about a serious first world country that we're messing with.
Maybe CSEC should be looking into our own corporations.
Yeah, I know. But that would be responsible government. Let's not ask for too much here.
Well, aren't they busy, legislating from their mother's basements?
Okay, we're going to come right back. We've got Robert Redford. We're going to be talking about pipelines, yes?
And, of course, our veterans.
Okay, so some important stuff coming up. Stay tuned. You're with Video Radio. Thanks for tuning in and being part of the solution.